It was the year 2008 in the United States, a time when the world was gripped by economic turmoil. But for one family in Florida, a far more personal tragedy was unfolding. This is the story of a young girl named Morgan, her mysterious boyfriend Toby, and a relationship that spiraled into darkness. Our story begins in West Palm Beach, South Florida, where Morgan Leppert was born on January 12, 1993. She was the youngest in her family, a sweet and cheerful child who adored animals, horses, and the outdoors. Her mother, Jerry, fondly called her Sunshine, a fitting nickname for a girl who seemed to radiate joy. Morgan grew up on a sprawling 5-acre farm mound, surrounded by family and nature, a seemingly idyllic childhood. But as Morgan grew older, cracks began to show. When her family moved to Putnam County, she started attending school, where she was described as quiet, steady, and unremarkable, a typical middle schooler. However, by the time she reached high school, things took a turn. Morgan became rebellious, skipping classes and struggling to fit in. Her mother, concerned for her daughter's well-being, decided to pull her out of school and homeschool her instead. It was 2007, and Morgan was just 14 years old. Around this time, a new figure entered Morgan's life, Toby Lowry. Toby was introduced to Morgan through her cousin, and at first glance, he seemed like a harmless teenager. Everyone in Morgan's circle believed he was 16 or 17, but in reality, Toby was 22, a fact he carefully concealed. Despite the age gap, Morgan and Toby grew closer, and their relationship quickly became romantic. Toby would visit Morgan at her home, and while her family had some reservations, they allowed the relationship to continue. But Toby's story took a dramatic turn when he showed up at Morgan's house one day, claiming he had been kicked out by his stepfather and that his mother was dying of cancer. He said he had nowhere else to go. Morgan, deeply sympathetic, begged her mother to let him stay. Jerry agreed on one condition: Toby and Morgan had to sleep in separate rooms. What was supposed to be a temporary arrangement stretched into months. Toby spent holidays with the Leppert family, becoming almost like one of their own. As time passed, Morgan and Toby's relationship grew more intense. Toby even declared his love for Morgan on his MySpace page, writing that he was taken by Morgan Lowry. But behind this seemingly romantic gesture lay a darker truth. Toby's MySpace was filled with disturbing imagery: drugs, violence, Confederate flags, and foul language. To Morgan's family, Toby seemed like a polite young man, but his online persona hinted at something far more sinister. The facade began to crumble when Jerry stumbled upon a piece of paper in Toby's room. It was a probation document revealing Toby's criminal past: drug charges, theft, burglary, and a 20-month prison sentence. But the most shocking detail was his date of birth: December 17, 1985. Toby wasn't a teenager. He was a 22-year-old man. Jerry was horrified. She immediately threw Toby out of the house and threatened to call the police. Morgan, still a minor, was forbidden from seeing him. But Morgan, now deeply infatuated, refused to let go. She began sneaking out to meet Toby, defying her mother's warnings. Jerry tried to discipline her, but Morgan was determined. She even threatened to run away to be with Toby, who was now living in a nearby trailer park. On April 22, 2008, 15-year-old Morgan went to meet Toby and never returned home. When Jerry tried to call her, there was no answer. Frantic with worry, Jerry went to the trailer park to confront Toby and find her daughter. But when she arrived, Morgan was nowhere to be found. All that remained was Morgan's mobile phone, left behind on a bedside table. The shattered pieces of Morgan's mobile phone lay scattered on the bedside table, a hammer resting ominously beside it. For Jerry, Morgan's mother, this was the final, horrifying clue. Her worst fears seemed confirmed. Morgan had been kidnapped. Without hesitation, Jerry reported her daughter missing, and the police sprang into action. Their first stop was the home of Toby's parents. When officers knocked on the door, Toby's mother answered, her face etched with exhaustion. She explained that she had given up on Toby long ago, unable to cope with his criminal past and recent convictions. Toby and Morgan had come to her door, but she had turned them away, refusing to enable his destructive behavior. Morgan's family was desperate. They pleaded with the police to issue a nationwide Amber Alert, fearing that Morgan was being held against her will or worse. But the police hesitated. Toby had never left Florida, and he had no means of transportation. An Amber Alert, they believed, was unnecessary. Meanwhile, Toby and Morgan were far from safe. They had fled to Melrose, a small town about 30 miles northwest, where they were living rough in the woods. For weeks, they slept on a makeshift mattress under the open sky, surviving on scraps and desperation. Morgan, still just 15 years old, had naively chosen to stay by Toby's side. But this wasn't the life she had imagined. She dreamed of running away with Toby, escaping Florida, and starting anew. But to do that, they needed a car. Their eyes fell on a 2003 silver Toyota pickup truck parked on Cherry Laurel Drive. The blue disabled badge in the window caught their attention. The owner, they reasoned, would be an easy target, and so a sinister plan began to take shape. The owner of the truck was James Thomas Stewart, a 66-year-old man who lived alone in a modest bungalow. Born without hands, James had never let his disability define him. He had worked as a commercial fisherman, tended to his garden, and cared for his beloved cats. By April 2008, he was a vulnerable but self-sufficient man, living quietly in Melrose. Morgan and Toby's plan was as twisted as it was cruel. Morgan would knock on James's door, pretending to be in distress, while Toby would sneak in through the back. Once inside, they would steal the keys, take whatever money they could find, and make their escape. On April 25, 2008, Morgan approached James's door and knocked. When he answered, she spun a tale of car trouble, asking to use his phone. James, ever the kind soul, welcomed her inside. Morgan made a call, but not to a mechanic. She dialed her own broken mobile phone, the one she had smashed herself to avoid being traced. As Morgan played her part, Toby slipped in through the back door. He grabbed a knife from the kitchen and moved silently through the house. When he found Morgan and James, he brandished the knife, demanding the keys to the truck and any cash James had. Morgan, now fully complicit, grabbed 2 heavy metal pipes and stood behind Toby, a chilling show of force. James, though disabled, was no pushover. He sized up the couple and lunged at Toby, determined to defend himself. But Toby was younger, stronger, and armed. At first, he used his fists, delivering brutal blows that shattered James's glasses and left him semiblind. James fell to the ground, and Toby stomped on his throat, leaving him gasping for air. But the violence didn't stop there. Toby pulled out the knife and stabbed James in the chest, ensuring he couldn't fight back. James, bleeding and in agony, was still conscious. According to Toby, it was at this moment that Morgan spoke up. "We're going to have to kill his ass," she allegedly said. "If we don't, we'll never make it out of here." Toby hesitated, but Morgan's resolve was unwavering. "Yes," she insisted. "Let's kill him, take the truck, and get out of here." James, hearing every word, pleaded in a trembling voice, "Why are you going to kill me?" Toby ignored him. What followed was a savage, unrelenting assault. Toby stabbed James repeatedly, slashed a deep wound down to the bone, and stomped on his head, crushing his skull against the wall. Blood pooled on the floor, and with every kick, brain matter oozed from James's nose. Toby was convinced James was dead, but the nightmare wasn't over yet. The scene inside James Stewart's bungalow was one of unimaginable horror. Blood stained the floors, weapons lay scattered, and the lifeless body of James bore the marks of a savage attack. But for Morgan and Toby, there was no time to linger. They had to leave. No doubts, no loose ends. As Toby stepped out of the room, he heard the sickening sound of metal thudding against flesh. Morgan, armed with 2 heavy metal pipes, was delivering blow after blow to James's face. When that wasn't enough, she picked up a knife and stabbed him. Finally, she grabbed a plastic bag from the kitchen and wrapped it tightly around James's head, ensuring he would never breathe again. With James dead, Morgan found the keys to his silver Toyota pickup truck and stole his wallet. They made no effort to clean up the crime scene. The weapons, the blood, the chaos, they left it all behind. Ripping the disabled badge from the truck, they sped off, heading straight for the US-Mexican border. Back in Florida, Morgan's mother, Jerry, was frantic. She contacted every news outlet she could, desperate to get Morgan's face on television, hoping someone, somewhere, had seen her daughter. The police, meanwhile, were following leads. They discovered that James Stewart had tried calling Morgan's broken phone. A police officer was dispatched to James's home to investigate. But when no one answered the door, the officer decided to return later. It was a decision that would delay the discovery of James's body, and the horrifying truth. As Morgan and Toby drove across state lines, they picked up a hitchhiker in Valdosta, Georgia, a 23-year-old man named Robert Booker. This seemingly random act would later prove to be a crucial piece of the puzzle. On May 1, 2008, nearly a week after James's murder, a concerned family member contacted the police. James hadn't been heard from in days, which was highly unusual. When officers arrived at his home, they were met with a scene of unspeakable horror. James's body, decomposing and brutalized, lay in a pool of blood. The evidence pointed to a vicious, premeditated attack. The police quickly connected the dots. James had been the last person to call Morgan's phone. Could Morgan and Toby be involved in his murder? Initially, Morgan was seen as a potential victim, a 15-year-old girl who might have been manipulated by an older man. But as the investigation unfolded, a far darker picture began to emerge. A warrant was issued for Toby's arrest on charges of grand theft auto, interfering with the custody of a child, and the murder of James Stewart. An Amber Alert was issued, and on May 3, 2008, a motorist in Texas recognized the couple from news reports. He called 911, and within hours, Morgan and Toby were in police custody. What followed was a series of interviews that would shock even the most seasoned investigators. Morgan, initially treated as a victim, was surprisingly candid, almost boastful. She giggled and laughed as she recounted how she and Toby had escaped Florida, just as they had planned. Her demeanor was chilling. This wasn't the behavior of a scared, manipulated teenager. Morgan seemed almost proud of what they had done. She claimed ignorance about the truck, insisting she didn't know where it came from or who it belonged to. She was just happy to be leaving Florida. But when the police interviewed Toby, the story took a darker turn. Against the advice of his attorney, Toby confessed, and his confession was graphic. He stood up in the interview room, reenacting the brutal stomping of James's head and detailing how he had stabbed him. He claimed the plan was entirely Morgan's idea. She had been determined to run away, and he had simply gone along with it. When their plan to steal a car turned violent, Toby said, Morgan had insisted they kill James. Toby described how Morgan had taken the lead in the attack, smashing James's face with metal pipes and suffocating him with a plastic bag. From Toby's perspective, he was just doing whatever it took to make Morgan happy. She was in charge, he said. She was calling the shots. Armed with Toby's confession, the police returned to Morgan. This time, their questions were sharper, more accusatory. They no longer saw her as an innocent victim. But the decision to interview Morgan without a lawyer sparked controversy. Her mother, Jerry, was not immediately notified, and the absence of legal representation raised serious questions about the fairness of the interrogation. When the police confronted Morgan with Toby's chilling confession, her story began to unravel. Gone was the playful, giggling teenager. In her place stood a girl forced to confront the gravity of what she had done. The investigators pressed her for details. How many times had she stabbed James with the knife? Morgan hesitated, then claimed she had only poked him, never driving the blade all the way through. She admitted to hitting James over the head with the metal pipes. 2 or 3 times, she said. But when the officer asked if she had been free to leave at any time, Morgan's response was haunting. I could have left if I wanted to, she said. When asked why she didn't, she replied simply, I didn't want to leave Toby behind. The investigator's next question cut to the heart of the matter. You would commit murder because you didn't want to leave Toby. Morgan's answer sent a chill through the room. I guess so, she said. I wanted to get out of Florida. Morgan then tried to justify her actions, claiming that James got what he deserved because she believed he was a pervert. She pointed to adult movies she claimed were scattered around his house, calling him disgusting. But her attempts to shift blame only deepened the horror of her confession. Morgan was arrested and charged with the murder of James Stewart. Over the next few months, Toby struck a plea deal with the Florida State Attorney's Office. In exchange for avoiding the death penalty, he agreed to a life sentence without the possibility of parole. His case never went to trial. Morgan, however, was a different story. Her new attorney, a seasoned lawyer from Orlando, was convinced that her age and the way the police had handled her interrogation would work in her favor. After all, she was just 15, a minor, protected by the state and assumed incapable of rational adult decision-making. But the attorney's confidence was misplaced. The state of Florida had other plans. They sought to try Morgan as an adult, with one critical caveat: she could not be sentenced to death. On August 7, 2009, Morgan's trial began in Putnam County. She faced charges of first-degree murder. The defense fought hard, objecting to the trial being held in adult court and arguing that her interview statements should be struck from the record. But their objections were overruled. The jury listened to a recording of Morgan's interrogation. A chilling exchange filled with giggles, offensive remarks, and a disturbing lack of remorse. At one point, Morgan tearfully claimed she was sorry and that she had acted out of love for Toby. But the jury wasn't convinced. To them, her tears seemed insincere, her remorse superficial. The prosecution called a key witness to the stand. Robert Booker, the hitchhiker Morgan and Toby had picked up in Georgia. Robert's testimony painted a damning picture of Morgan. He described her as the dominant one in the relationship, the one calling the shots. If things didn't go her way, she would lash out, and Toby would comply. Robert's account supported the prosecution's argument that Morgan was fully aware of her actions and fully in control. On September 29, 2009, the courtroom was packed with Morgan's family, James's loved ones, and a handful of supporters. Morgan entered in a blue prison uniform, her hands shackled. As the judge delivered the sentence, she buried her head in her hands, tears streaming down her face. The verdict was life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. James's brother, Mike Stewart, spoke for the family. "Every night when I go to sleep, I pray that this whole thing was one big, bizarre nightmare." Morgan, once her mother's sunshine, was now dubbed the Blue-Eyed Devil. But the story didn't end there. In 2010, a landmark U.S. Supreme Court decision in Graham v. Florida prohibited life without parole sentences for juveniles in non-homicide cases. This ruling paved the way for Morgan's sentence to be reduced to 50 years. Then, in 2016, further legal developments led to her being resentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. She will be eligible for a review after 25 years, when she will be 40 years old. This is the story of Morgan Leppert, a girl whose life took a dark and tragic turn. From a carefree childhood to a brutal crime, her journey is a stark reminder of how love, manipulation, and desperation can lead to unimaginable consequences. Stay with us as we explore the aftermath of this case, the legal battles, and the questions that still linger. What drives a teenager to commit such a heinous act? And can someone so young ever truly be redeemed?